Today we're making lemon blueberry scones. These are a delicious breakfast treat, and I do mean treat. Unlike muffins, which can fall on the healthier end of the breakfast pastry spectrum, these are full of cream and butter. But hey, fat is flavor and you deserve a treat. So let's get baking. These scones come together pretty quickly, so we'll actually start by preheating our oven to 425 degrees and getting a baking sheet ready, which just means making sure that it's lined with parchment or a baking mat or something like that. All right, so setting that aside, we'll start mixing. In one large bowl, we will put a quarter cup of granulated sugar. That works out to 50 grams. We put that right in the bottom of this big bowl. And then to that, we will add our lemon zest. So I've got a nice clean lemon, clean and dry, and a microplane to zest it with. And I'm going to zest this lemon directly into the sugar, like so. And do make sure when you're zesting your lemon that you get the yellow outer part of the peel, but you don't get too far into the white pith because that will get bitter pretty quickly. So I'll tap, or scrape the rest of the lemon zest off of the underside of my grater and set that and the lemon aside, and then we'll just work this lemon zest into the granulated sugar with our fingertips. And what this does is it releases that lemon flavor, which is really contained in the oils in the skin or the peel of the lemon. And by rubbing that with the granulated sugar, the grittiness there is abrasive, and it helps bring out extra lemon flavor. All right, gonna clean off the fingers and add the rest of the dry ingredients. So that will be 2 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour. Works out to 280 grams if you're measuring by weight. Another scoop or two here. And there we go. We're going to keep that flour here because we'll need it to flour the counter in a moment. We'll use an entire tablespoon of baking powder and half a teaspoon of salt. I always use kosher salt. You can use table salt, maybe just go a little light on it if you're using table salt. All right, so that's the rest of our dry ingredients. And since we'll be using a pastry blender to mix the butter in a few minutes, or in a minute, I'm going to go ahead and use that to stir. Always stir your dry ingredients thoroughly. If that's the point at which you add any leavener like baking soda or baking powder, you want to make sure your leavener is mixed in well and you are not going to have any kind of not so tasty pockets of unmixed baking soda or baking powder. Not a tasty experience. All right, I think that's pretty good. So now I'm going to add butter. This is 6 tablespoons of butter, or 3 ounces, or again, measuring in grams, 85 grams. And it's cold and I've cut it up into chunks. You don't need to be too precious about it, but that's going to make this take just a little less elbow grease. And I'm cutting the butter in to the dry mixture with this pastry blender. If you don't have one of these, you can do this with forks or knives. I've never quite had the hang of that myself. Or you could put it this whole thing into a food processor. You would kind of blitz your sugar and lemon peel together for, you know, just 1 or 2 pulses, and then the rest of the dry ingredients for a pulse or 2, and then carefully work in your butter. Or if none of those apply, but you have a good old-fashioned box grater, you can grate your butter. You definitely want it to be cold in that case, even frozen works. And just careful of the fingers, but grate your butter directly into your dry mixture, and really then just give it a stir. All right, and the idea here is that we work that butter in until there are some pieces that are still the size of a pea or so, and the rest are something smaller. We don't want it uniformly pulverized into our flour mixture, because then our scones won't be flaky. And scones, empanadas, pie crust, biscuits, any flaky baked good gets its flakiness from pockets of fat between floury dough, and that forms that flaky texture that we're looking for. So don't overmix. If you undermix a little bit, it's better than overmixing. All right, so there we go. The butter is worked in, and now it's time to stir in our blueberries. I've got a cup of blueberries here. All right, just going to kind of toss those with the dry mixture like so. And then I have a cup of heavy cream. You can do this with whole milk. You can do this with buttermilk. Actually, might be better than the whole milk. I like using the cream. These are not health food, and they're not going to pretend to be. All right, so we're going to pour almost all of this cream. I'm just going to leave a couple of teaspoons or so at the bottom of the cup, because we'll use that to give these a wash, the tops of the scones, before we put them into the oven. All right, so we don't want to overmix here. We're just going to fold the cream into our flour and blueberry mixture. And once it starts to form what seems like a cohesive or almost cohesive dough, we'll be dumping that out onto a floured counter. It's still pretty crumbly here. I'm going to go ahead and scatter some flour onto the counter. I'm going to scrape the spatula off. And I'm going to do the rest with my hands. So I'll use my hands just to kind of squish this in together and see if it holds together. It's still pretty crumbly. And then I'm going to dump it out onto the counter. This is messy, that's okay. And just use my hands to get this the rest of the way mixed. Again, I want to err on the side of crumbly, but I do need it to hold together. And if in the process we squish some blueberries, and we will, that's certainly okay. All right, so I'm gonna get this to hold together, turn it over, work the rest of the crumbly bits in. And then once it's starting to just hold together, again, I don't wanna smash any of those or all of those remaining bits of butter into oblivion. I'm going to separate this into 2 halves, or close to equal halves. All right, and form those into discs about an inch or so thick. And now I'm going to divide each of these circles into 6 wedges. I'm using a pastry blender here because that's also going to help me scoop these off of the kitchen counter. But you can use a knife. It doesn't even have to be a particularly sharp knife. And this does not have to be a precisely measured thing. All right, and there we go. 6 and 6 for a grand total of 12. And what I'll do now is just gently move each one of these that I'm going to bake onto my prepared baking sheet. And then they will have one more step before they go into the oven. If you don't want to bake all of them at once, you can put them onto a, say, plastic lined baking sheet and put them in the freezer and freeze until they are nice and hard. And then you can take those frozen scones, wrap them well, and keep them in the freezer until you're ready to bake. And why would you want to do that? Well, because scones are really quite a lot better the day they're baked or maybe the day after. So this other half dozen scones are destined for the freezer, and they'll be a gift to a future me. Just add 2 or 3 minutes to the baking time and bake them directly from frozen. All right, but the other scones, ta-da, are going to get a brush of cream. So this is why we left that little bit of cream in the bottom of the mixing cup. And if you are freezing your scones, definitely don't do this step before you freeze them, okay? And give them their wash when they come out of the freezer while your oven is preheating. All right, oops, a little too flaky. We're just gonna nudge that bit right back on there. No problem. Wash some cream over it. All good. And once these have that little layer of cream on top, we're going to finish them with a sprinkle of coarse sugar, sometimes referred to as sanding sugar, demerara sugar, sugar in the raw. All right, you can use just regular old granulated sugar to do this as well. It won't just be quite as sparkly, but that's okay. Or if you have access to sugar cubes, crush them. Just don't crush them as fine as regular granulated sugar, and that would do the trick as well. If you prefer to glaze your scones instead, you can skip the cream wash and the demerara sugar and juice the lemon that we zested and mix that with a little bit of powdered sugar, just enough to make the glaze the right thickness. You could always do that really right after these come out of the oven. All right, we are ready for the oven. They'll go in there for 15 to 17 minutes until the tops are nice and golden brown and the centers are nice and set. All right, and that baking time can depend on how juicy your blueberries were, etc. So do keep an eye on them, and of course it depends on your oven too. All right, we'll be back when these are baked. 15 minutes have gone by and our scones are out of the oven. Nice and golden brown on the tops, and they smell fantastic. All that's left to do is to let them cool enough to be able to take a taste. We hope you give these a try and you check back every Friday at 4 o'clock for a new recipe.